Today's story is so wild it feels like legend, set under a pale winter moon and the crackle of campfire sparks. In a land ruled by snow and silence, two strangers with scars dared to choose love. It began with one arrow aimed at her heart and ended with a vow no wind could erase at Ashen Vows. Before we kick off this adventure, don't forget to hit like on the video and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. The Wyoming wind screamed across the plains, tearing snow from the ground and hurling it into the air until earth and sky dissolved into a single sheet of white. Eliza's heart staggered forward, each breath sharp and shallow, her lungs burning as if the cold itself were clawing inside her chest. She wasn't merely lost in a storm. She was disappearing, becoming a shadow in a life that had never truly been her own. That life had been mapped out long before she had a voice in it, shaped by a father she scarcely knew, a man whose presence in her world had always come through rigid letters and carefully timed bank drafts. A life that ended with her hand placed into that of a man whose name felt as distant and unwelcoming as the frozen land now closing around her. They called it a marriage, a proper alliance, two cattle empires bound together by ink and inheritance. Eliza knew better. It was a sentence. As the storm swallowed all direction and her strength drained away, something else emerged from the blinding white. A darker shape moving against the wind. A presence. A figure cutting through the storm as if it belonged to him. An Apache warrior, tall and unmoving, eyes sharp as flint and just as unforgiving. He was not the man she had been ordered to marry. Yet in that moment, he alone held the power to decide whether she would live or die. Only days earlier, her journey west had begun beneath iron wheels and black smoke. The train from Boston rattled endlessly across steel tracks, its windows smeared with soot and winter frost. Eliza sat rigid in her seat, fingers curled tightly around a worn leather copy of Moby Dick. The book was familiar, comforting, an anchor against the rising tide of dread she could not quiet. At 20 years old, she had never traveled farther west than Philadelphia. Now she was being carried toward the Wyoming Territory, a place that had existed for her only in lurid dime novels and half-truths about cowboys and savages. Her father, Samuel Hart, had summoned her home after 10 years at an elite East Coast boarding school. Her education, he declared, was complete. It was time to fulfill her obligation. That obligation had a name: Luther Crow. Crow was more than a man. He was an institution. A cattle baron whose power stretched across the territory like a brand burned into open land. The marriage was nothing more than arithmetic. Land secured, influence expanded, fortunes combined. Eliza's dowry, her late mother's inheritance, would vanish into Crow's empire, while her father's smaller ranch gained protection. Eliza herself was merely the signature at the bottom of the page. She had seen Crow's photograph before leaving Boston. A stiff daguerreotype captured a man in his late 40s, heavy-set and unyielding, his thick mustache unable to hide the cruelty etched into his mouth. His eyes were cold, assessing, eyes that suggested obedience was expected and resistance would not be tolerated. The train left her in Cheyenne. From there, she was placed onto a stagecoach bound for Fort Laramie. A brutal, bone-shaking ride meant to deliver her directly into her future. The stagecoach was cramped and suffocating, packed with strangers. A fast-talking medicine salesman, a silent man gripping a rifle across his knees, and a weary young woman struggling to calm a crying infant. Eliza sat stiffly among them, her fine wool dress and kid leather gloves marking her as an outsider. A fragile figure dropped into a world of dust and rough edges. Outside, the land unfolded in vast, unforgiving beauty. Nebraska's rolling plains gave way to Wyoming's stark ridges and endless sky. When Eliza dared to crack open the window, cold air rushed in, carrying the scent of pine and sage. Clean, sharp, and intoxicating. For one fleeting moment, wonder stirred in her chest. Perhaps this land held something different. Perhaps freedom existed beyond the walls of Boston parlors and polite prisons. Then the sky darkened. The blue vanished beneath a ceiling of gray. Wind rose suddenly, snapping against the coach and rattling its frame. Snow began to fall. Thick, wet flakes at first, then faster, harder, until the world beyond the glass dissolved into chaos. The salesman fell silent. The rifleman leaned forward, jaw tightening. The baby's cries grew desperate. The storm had come, and with it, the end of the life Eliza Hart had known. The first flakes struck the glass heavy and wet, bursting against the window pane before the storm swallowed the world whole. Within minutes, the view beyond the coach dissolved into a churning wall of white. The salesman, who moments earlier had boasted endlessly about his miracle tonic, fell into an uneasy silence. Across from him, the rifleman leaned closer to the window, his jaw tightening as the sky disappeared. The baby sensed the shift before anyone else. Its thin cries rose into frantic screams, slicing through the groan of wind and wood. At the reins, Amos Black, a weathered driver with decades on the trail, hauled the team to a halt. He half shouted over the gale, his voice raw with urgency. "We'll try for the way station. Ain't far," he barked. "But in this whiteout, it might as well be on the moon." The coach lurched forward again, wheels grinding through snow that piled faster than the horses could fight it. Outside, the land lost all shape and meaning. No horizon, no road, only shifting white. Eliza Hart felt the cold creep inside the carriage. A damp, punishing chill that cut straight through her fine wool dress and settled deep into her bones. The baby's cries dwindled to a weak whimper. Its mother rocked back and forth, lips moving in silent prayer, eyes wide with terror. Time stretched and twisted. Minutes felt like hours. At last, the coach shuddered violently and came to a dead stop. Amos Black forced the door open, his beard and mustache crusted with ice, snow clinging to his lashes. His expression was grim. "That's it," he said flatly. "We're done." He glanced back at the wheels. "Axle's gone. We'll have to run for it." Eliza's stomach dropped. Run for it. Out there, in that screaming white hell, it sounded like a death warrant. But there was no arguing with a broken axle. One by one, they stepped down into the storm. The wind tore at Eliza's skirts, driving needles of ice into her face and hands. She could barely see past her own outstretched arm. The world spun and shrieked around them. "Stay close," Amos shouted. "Don't break off. Follow me." "The station's just over the rise." But there was no rise. No landmark. Nothing but endless, blinding snow. They moved as a single, frightened knot, trusting the old driver's instinct more than their own failing senses. Yet the storm showed no mercy. It had no interest in plans or prayers. The wind surged again, savage and sudden. Eliza stumbled hard, nearly falling. When she fought her way upright, the others were gone, erased by the whiteout as if they had never existed. Panic knifed through her chest. "Amos," she cried, "can anyone hear me?" Only the wind answered. She stood alone, utterly and terrifyingly alone, swallowed by the heart of a Wyoming blizzard. The cold crept deeper, numbing her fingers, her legs, her thoughts. A heavy drowsiness dragged at her mind, whispering that rest would be easy. So easy. She knew better. If she stopped, even for a moment, she would not wake again. Her legs felt weighted with iron as she pushed forward, vision blurring, thoughts dissolving into fear and despair. Through the haze, a face surfaced in her mind, Luther Crow, cold-eyed and unyielding. She had been traveling west to marry a stranger. Now she would die as one, forgotten in a frozen wasteland. The irony cut deep. She had hated the life chosen for her, despised every chain it carried. Now she would trade anything for its safety, for warmth, even for a loveless marriage. Her strength gave out. Her knees buckled. Eliza sank into the snow, breath shaking, the storm closing in as the white swallowed her whole. The worn copy of Moby Dick slipped from Eliza Hart's frozen fingers and vanished beneath the snow, as if it had never existed. So this was the end. This was how her story closed, not with violence or fire, but with silence, an aching, slow surrender to the cold. Her vision dimmed, the world narrowing as darkness pressed in. Then, through the spinning white, a shape took form. A tall figure astride a horse, rising out of the storm like something summoned by the land itself. For a heartbeat, Eliza thought it was a trick of her failing mind, a final illusion conjured by frost and exhaustion. But the figure kept coming, cutting through the wind, growing sharper, real, a man. Long black hair framing a hard, composed face. Eyes dark, steady, and alert. He wore a heavy buffalo robe, a rifle balanced easily in the bend of his arm. He was not a white man. He was Apache, his presence as fierce and unyielding as the blizzard around them. He dismounted without haste, his moccasins soundless against the deep snow. When he knelt before her, Eliza saw that what she had mistaken for cruelty in his eyes was something else entirely. Concern, understanding. He reached out, brushing the snow from her face with a gloved hand. The touch was careful, almost reverent, and the warmth of it sent a sharp pulse through her numb body. He spoke softly, his voice low and grounded, the words unfamiliar, yet their meaning reached her all the same. A question, one that hovered between them in the frozen air. A question that would reshape everything that followed. He was not the man she had been promised to, but standing at the edge of death, he was the only reason she might survive. His name was Cain. Earlier that day, Cain had been following the tracks of a starving winter wolf that had been stalking the Apache horses. The storm had nearly erased everything, but the broken lines of a stagecoach and the faint drifting prints of a single traveler caught his eye. Curiosity and a deep respect for life had drawn him onward. He found Eliza Hart just as the cold was claiming her. The Apache called it white death. The quiet moment when the body gives up and the spirit begins to drift. Cain had seen it before. He did not hesitate. Moving with practiced efficiency, he wrapped her in the buffalo robe, lifted her onto his horse, and mounted behind her. His body shielded hers from the wind as the animal turned into the storm. Eliza slipped in and out of awareness. Sensations blurred together. The steady rise and fall of the horse, the deep warmth of the robe, the solid strength at her back. She heard Cain murmur to the horse in his native tongue, rhythmic sounds meant to calm both animal and rider. She had grown up on stories filled with fear, tales of bloodthirsty savages and untamed men. Yet the man carrying her now, the one she had been taught to dread, was the reason she still breathed. After what felt like hours without time, they reached his winter camp. It was nothing like the sprawling villages Eliza had imagined from cheap illustrations. Instead, it was a quiet, sheltered clearing among cottonwood trees, a handful of lodges built from hide and timber. Smoke drifted upward, thin and steady, a promise of warmth in a frozen world. Cain carried her into his lodge and laid her gently onto a bed of thick furs. Firelight flickered across the interior, illuminating painted symbols along the walls and the simple tools of survival. Knives, bows, and carefully kept weapons, each with its place. For the first time since the storm began, Eliza felt something loosen inside her chest. She was alive. The scent inside the lodge was thick and layered. Wood smoke, cooked meat, and something raw and ancient that Eliza's heart couldn't quite place. As she stirred weakly, an old woman appeared at her side. Her face was lined like cracked earth, eyes bright and sharp like a hawk's. She spoke softly in Apache, her voice low and soothing as she held out a bowl of hot broth. Eliza, throat raw and muscles aching from the storm, took it with shaking hands. The warmth spread down her throat like fire chasing away the ice. The following days blurred together in a haze of dreams and exhaustion. She drifted between sleep and awareness as her body slowly clawed its way back from the edge. The elder woman's name was Shaya, a name that meant bluebird in her tongue. With calm, skilled hands, she nursed Eliza back to life. She packed herbal poultices around her frostbitten fingers and toes, rubbed salves into her skin, and brought her a steady stream of rich stews and healing teas. From whispers around the lodge, Eliza came to understand that Cain was no ordinary warrior. He was known among his people for his skill, for his silence, for a kind of strength that didn't shout, but held steady like the spine of the earth. He was a widower. His wife and child, Naya and Lior, had been taken by smallpox years ago. The sorrow hadn't left him since. She saw it in his eyes, in the way he moved with quiet weight, like a man carrying a history he could not set down. And yet, he was not broken. There was still fire in him, controlled, but burning. As Eliza grew stronger, her eyes took in more of the life around her. These people, who she had once imagined as wild and cruel, were nothing of the sort. The Apache were precise and graceful, deeply rooted to the land. Their words carried rhythm and poetry, even when she couldn't understand them. She saw reverence in their rituals, pride in their beadwork, care in their daily routines. Their connection to the land wasn't just survival, it was identity. Every lodge bore painted symbols that spoke of family and spirit. Every moccasin and tunic was crafted with care and purpose. Eliza watched them and felt a stirring in herself, a quiet undoing of all she had been told. Cain, though still a man of few words, began to open up by the fire at night. He shared stories, not just of battles, but of legends, of ancestors, of honor. He spoke of the dust riders who pushed west with railroads and rifles, of treaties signed and shattered, of buffalo herds slaughtered not for food but for sport. His voice held no self-pity, only truth. He spoke like a man protecting not just a people, but a way of life being hunted into extinction. Eliza listened, and the world she thought she knew cracked open. She had always believed westward expansion was noble, even glorious, a symbol of progress. But in Cain's stories, she saw the cost. Lives uprooted, cultures erased, dignity trampled beneath iron and greed. And still they endured. Still they fought to hold on to what was theirs. The bond between them deepened, unspoken but undeniable. What began in a snowstorm became something more. Something forged through pain, through trust, through long silences filled with understanding. Eliza found herself watching Cain not just with gratitude, but with growing awe. And he, in return, saw past her Eastern clothes and polished words to something real beneath. Something stubborn and searching. But that quiet rhythm shattered when a visitor came from the outside. A white man. A fur trapper named Dr. Owen Black, known to the Apache and trusted by few. He rode into camp with eyes heavy from the trail and breath tight with bad news. "Luther Crow's looking for her," he said, the moment Cain pulled him aside. "Sent word up and down the frontier, offered a reward large enough to shake loose the rocks." Eliza's blood ran cold. She wasn't forgotten. She wasn't free. Luther Crow, her would-be husband, had set the territory crawling with men eager to trade a woman for gold. His reach stretched even here, into this hidden grove of safety. A cage was waiting for her, whether she wanted it or not. That night, as the wind howled outside the lodge, another storm brewed in her chest. 2 lives, 2 men, 2 futures. One promised order, power, and wealth, and the slow, suffocating death of everything she was. The other held fire and danger. Yes, but also truth. And maybe, if she dared, freedom. The man who'd pulled her from the jaws of the blizzard, who had offered warmth instead of chains, had shown Eliza Hart a different path, one she never even knew was hers to walk. As she glanced toward the firelight, she caught Cain's profile, sharp and unreadable. He stared into the flames like they held answers, but his eyes betrayed the storm roiling inside him, one that mirrored her own. She understood then. A choice had to be made, and not just any choice, but one that would shape both their futures. Whatever path she chose, there would be no return. There was no escaping the pull of the sacred Black Hills or the way this land had already carved itself into her bones. She was no longer who she had been. The news brought by Dr. Owen Black had spread through the winter camp like wildfire. Luther Crow's bounty was no small threat. It was a call to every mercenary west of the Missouri. The quiet peace Eliza had found among the cottonwoods fractured, replaced by fear and tension that hung heavy in the air. The outside world had found her, and it came with gold in one hand and a gun in the other. Cain walked the perimeter of the camp like a man preparing for siege. He knew the ways of the white men, their lies, their hunger for land, their iron trails. He'd seen what happened when their words failed and bullets replaced them. He knew a man like Luther Crow didn't quit. He bought persistence. He bought silence. And if needed, he bought blood. A council gathered beneath the largest lodge, where firelight danced over painted walls and faces weathered by wisdom. The elders sat in a circle, and the topic was Eliza. Her presence was no longer a quiet secret. It was a spark that could burn down everything they'd built. Some voices demanded she be sent back at once. "She's a lightning rod," one man said. "Where there's reward, there's ruin." Soldiers would come, treaties would break, women and children would suffer for her presence. Others, though, spoke of duty, not to governments or greed, but to the ways handed down by their ancestors. The old laws, the laws of honor, and of the Great Spirit. "She came to us near death," said one. "To cast her out now would shame us all." Cain stood then, calm and solid as stone. He spoke not as a warrior, but as a witness. He told them how he had found her in the snow, barely breathing. He told of her strength, of how she had not shrunk from their ways, but watched and listened. He said she was not like the others. She did not look upon them as savages or their land as a prize. She came here broken, he said quietly. But she did not ask to be rescued, and she has not run. The council was silent until Shia stepped forward, her old voice brittle as winter grass. The storm brought her here, she said, and storms do not wander. They are sent. Her words settled over the room like smoke. And just like that, the decision was made. Eliza would stay, under Cain's protection, until the wind decided otherwise. But fate has a way of showing up uninvited. Just 3 days later, a lone rider came down the ridge. He didn't wear a trapper's coat or carry trade goods. He rode hard and sat straight, a pale man with a sunburned face, dressed in a worn black suit and bowler hat that didn't belong in the wilderness. His boots were dusty, his eyes mean. He didn't come for trade or friendship. He came with suspicion and steel. The man was one of Luther Crow's hires, a bounty hunter with a reputation soaked in blood. He had followed hoof prints, gut instinct, and the whisper of a reward big enough to make men disappear. He found Cain waiting for him at the camp's edge, one hand resting loose on the hilt of a knife sheathed at his hip. The rider, Cole Danner, swung down from his saddle. His eyes flicked over the lodges, the smoke, the children laughing somewhere in the back. Then he said it, his voice dry and sharp as pine needles. "I'm looking for a woman." Cole Danner spoke with a gravel rasp, his voice sharp as a whetstone. "A white woman came in on the Cheyenne stage," he said. "She's engaged to Mr. Luther Crow." Cain didn't flinch. His face was stone, his voice flat. "I have seen no white woman." Cole narrowed his eyes. The warrior was lying. He could feel it. There was a faint twitch in Cain's jaw, a flicker of fire behind the calm mask. "Mr. Crow's offering a handsome reward," Cole said, a smug curl on his lips. $1,000 in gold. That's no small sum for a simple Indian. The insult hit like a stone dropped in still water. Cain's fingers flexed around the hilt of his knife, but he didn't reach for it. He knew what bloodshed would bring: reprisal, soldiers, fire. And worse, it would endanger Eliza's heart and every soul in the camp. "Your gold means nothing to me," Cain said coldly. "Go back to your white chief. Tell him his bride isn't here." Cole flashed yellowed teeth in a wolfish grin. "I don't think so," he said. "I'll take a look around for myself." He made to push past, but Cain stepped into his path with speed that startled even the horses. They stood nose to nose, unmoving, two men bound by a silent clash of wills. The tension was sharp enough to snap the air in two. Then from the edge of her lodge, Eliza stepped out. Her heart pounded like thunder against her ribs, but her voice was clear. "I'm here." Cole's eyes widened, stunned. Then came a slow, venomous smile. Well, he said. "Ain't you a sight? The blushing bride herself." He turned to Cain with mocking triumph. So the noble savage was lying. Should have figured. Eliza's chest clenched. She had revealed herself, and in doing so, she had unmasked Cain's attempt to protect her, to protect them all. "He was only trying to help," she said. "I was lost in the storm. He saved my life." Cole let out a sharp laugh, all gravel and bile. "Saved your life, or just claimed you for himself?" His eyes gleamed cruelly. "A warm white girl to keep him company through the long nights, that it?" The words struck like a backhand across the face. Eliza stiffened, fury burning in her throat. Before she could speak, Cain's voice cut through the space. Quiet, edged like steel. You will speak of the woman with respect." His hand never left the knife. And for the first time, Cole hesitated. He was cruel, yes, but he wasn't stupid. He looked around. The Apache warriors weren't far, and Cain was not a man to push. Cole raised both hands in mock surrender. All right, he said. "No need to puff your feathers." He took a step toward Eliza. "I'll take the lady and be on my way. Mr. Crow will be mighty pleased." He reached for her arm, but Eliza jerked back, her voice slicing the air like a whip. "I am not a piece of property. Not yours, not his." Her voice trembled, but her eyes burned. Cole's smile vanished. His face darkened. The game had changed. "You are whatever Mr. Crow says you are," Cole Danner snapped, his voice dropping to a cold, dangerous edge. "And right now, you're his fiancée." He stepped forward, hand reaching to seize her. But Cain moved faster. In a blink, he placed himself between them, his frame rigid, muscles taut like a coiled spring ready to strike. "She chooses for herself," he said, voice low and sharp as a drawn blade. Cole hesitated. Violence wasn't working, so he changed tactics. His tone softened into something slick, coaxing. "Look, miss," he said, turning to Eliza Hart with a faux smile. "I know you've been through hell out here, lost, scared, alone. I get it. But you need to think clearly now. Mr. Crow's not a man to cross. He's got reach, influence, friends in places that can make life real hard for you. And for them." He gestured toward the Apache camp, the women clutching their children, the quiet onlookers holding their breath. "You don't want to bring trouble down on these people, do you?" His voice dipped into poison-laced honey. "Just come with me. You'll be safe. You'll be cared for. You'll have silk sheets and warm meals and not a care in the world." He tilted his head. What more could a girl like you ask for? Every word was a trap, a guilt-laced blade aimed straight at her conscience. And it hit, because Eliza knew he wasn't entirely wrong. Her presence here had become a threat. Refusing to go could rain ruin down on the very people who had saved her. She stood frozen between two fates, freedom wrapped in danger, or safety wrapped in chains. Her gaze found Cain. His face was carved with turmoil, anger at Cole, pride in her, fierce protectiveness. But beneath it all, the quiet ache of knowing the choice was not his to make. This wasn't a battle of blades. It was hers, her burden, her loss. She inhaled sharply, her chest heavy as lead. "All right," she whispered. "I'll go." The words tasted like ash. Cole grinned wide, victorious. He turned to Cain, his expression gleaming with mockery. "You see," he said. "In the end, they always pick their own kind." He grabbed Eliza's arm roughly, his grip hard and possessive. She didn't fight it. Her body was numb, her soul hollowed out. As he pulled her toward the horse, she dared one last glance over her shoulder. Cain stood still, their eyes locked, an entire world spoken in silence. Regret, pain, and something tender, something fragile. Love, maybe, blooming too late. Then she was lifted onto the horse like luggage, and the camp faded behind her. The place where she'd first felt breath in her lungs. The only place where her name hadn't felt like a brand. Snow began to fall again, soft and slow, covering the tracks of Cole's horse, wiping away every trace of her time there like it had never happened. The shadow of the Black Hills disappeared into the gray behind her. And Eliza Hart knew, somewhere deep and unshakable, that a part of her had been left behind in that sacred frozen land. The ride to Crow Hill was long, cold, and silent. Cole, now smug and satisfied, said nothing more. He had what he came for, but Eliza carried the weight of everything she was about to lose. Cole Danner kept his eyes fixed on the trail ahead, saying little, the silence between them colder than the wind. Wrapped in a coarse wool blanket he'd tossed at her without a word, Eliza Hart sat slumped in the saddle. Her thoughts a churn of regret and quiet surrender. What once felt wild and breathtaking from Cain's horse now looked bleak and barren. The snow-covered plains stretched endlessly, colorless and cruel, mirroring the emptiness she felt inside. After a hard ride that lasted a day and a half, the landscape finally gave way to civilization, or what passed for it. Crow Hill loomed ahead. Luther Crow's empire, a kingdom carved into the Wyoming wilderness. The sprawling ranch spread out like a military post, clean, precise, self-sufficient. At the center stood the main house, 2 stories of timber and stone, solid and unyielding. Barns, bunkhouses, and stables surrounded it like satellites orbiting a star. Cowboys, the dust riders, moved briskly between buildings, each one shaped by loyalty, fear, or both. On the wide front porch of the great house stood the man himself. Luther Crow looked exactly like the daguerreotype Eliza had seen. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in an immaculate suit that stood out like imported porcelain in the rough land around him. His expression was as tight and humorless as the stitched collar around his neck. His gaze swept over Eliza slowly, taking in her tangled hair, her worn moccasins, the Apache blanket she still clutched around her shoulders. A flicker of irritation passed across his face like a cloud, then vanished beneath a thin, possessive smile. "Eliza," he said, his deep baritone soaked in false warmth. I was beginning to worry. He didn't ask if she was well. He didn't ask if she was hurt or afraid. He was only concerned with what belonged to him being back where he could see it. He tossed Cole a nod and handed him a pouch heavy with gold coins. Payment made, debt closed. Then he turned back to Eliza. "You must be exhausted," he said, voice coated in mock concern. "There's a room waiting for you. You'll want to freshen up. Make yourself presentable." He led her inside without another word. The house was everything he wanted the world to believe about him. Grand, ostentatious, a monument to conquest. The walls were crowded with mounted heads of elk, buffalo, and bear, glass eyes staring down with judgment and frozen fear. The furniture was thick with carving, the rugs plush and Eastern-made. Every piece screamed wealth, power, control. He didn't live here. He ruled it. Eliza was taken upstairs to a lavish bedroom. A 4-poster bed draped in lace, a velvet fainting couch beneath stained glass windows, a full wardrobe lined with expensive dresses tailored to fit her body like a glove. It was luxury, but it felt like a cage. A young maid was already inside, waiting, nervous, mousy, and barely more than a girl. Her name was Mara, Irish by the lilt in her tongue, terrified by the way she kept flinching at the sound of footsteps beyond the door. She helped Eliza bathe and dress, with hands that trembled and eyes that avoided mirrors. She didn't speak unless spoken to. She kept her head down like prey in a hunter's house. That night, Eliza was expected to dine with Luther Crow. She chose the simplest dress in the wardrobe, a dark blue velvet with a high neck and long sleeves. It matched the hollow ache in her chest. Her hair she tied back in a tight chignon. No jewelry, no rouge, just pale skin and silent eyes. She looked like a woman attending her own funeral. Luther, in contrast, was practically gleeful. He uncorked a bottle of imported wine, poured without asking, and launched into a monologue of cattle prices, land acquisitions, and victories over rival ranchers. He smiled as he spoke, at himself mostly. And when he mentioned Eliza, it was like speaking of a fine horse. "She's strong-blooded," he said to the room. "Bred well, beautiful. I expect she'll produce healthy sons, heirs. That's the plan." He never once asked about what had happened in the Apache camp. Never mentioned Cain, the man who had carried her through the storm, who had stood between her and death. Luther wanted that part of the story gone. Scrubbed clean, rewritten. But Eliza couldn't forget. She could still feel the warmth of Cain's hand against hers. Still remember his voice, the way he'd looked at her. Not as property, not as some acquisition, but as someone worth saving. And here, in this grand house filled with trophies and lies, she had never felt more alone. She couldn't shake the memory. The warmth of Cain's lodge, the way Shea would hum softly as she tended to her wounds, the melodic rhythm of the Apache tongue spoken around her like a lullaby. But more than anything, she couldn't forget the feel of Cain's hand in hers, solid and grounding. That memory clung to her like the scent of smoke in hair, no matter how many silks or perfumes tried to smother it. Days blurred into weeks at Crow Hill, and Eliza's heart drifted through them like a ghost in velvet. Each morning, she woke in a grand room that felt colder than any blizzard she'd survived. Mara, wide-eyed and quiet as a field mouse, would dress her in lace and ribbon. Then she'd be left to her routines, reading books she didn't care about, sewing things she didn't need, or staring out at the barren land that seemed to stretch endlessly beyond the window like a prison yard. She had become a fixture in the house, a silent, well-kept thing, admired from afar but never truly seen. Luther Crow, satisfied by appearances, seemed perfectly content with their arrangement. He didn't seek conversation. He sought control. And Eliza, in her mute refusal to break, gave him the illusion of obedience. Each night, he would come to her smelling of whiskey and cigars, his voice heavy with his own importance. He'd talk at her, not to her. Sometimes his hand would brush her shoulder or linger too long at her waist, his touch cold and possessive. She'd recoil inside, heart thudding, but never flinch outwardly. She knew better than to provoke a man like him. She feared him, not just the man, but the rage behind his stillness, the barely hidden fire that lurked beneath his suit and manners. She feared the wedding, now looming like a noose on the horizon. She feared a life stretched out before her like a winter with no end. Then, one day, a new ranch hand rode in. He was quiet, with a hard-set jaw and scars that ran deep across his face and deeper still in his eyes. At first, Eliza barely noticed him, until she passed two cowboys whispering by the barn. "That new one said, spitting into the dirt. "Name's Cole. Used to run with some bad folk. Did things out near the territories. Real mean." And just like that, the color drained from her face. It was Cole Danner, the man who had ripped her from Cain's arms, who had mocked her, who had dragged her across the snow like she was cargo. That night, she confronted Luther Crow. Her hands trembled, but her voice held firm. "Why is he here?" she asked. "That man, Cole. Why did you bring him here?" Crow didn't look up from his glass. His tone was dry, flat. "He's useful," he said. "Knows how to handle trouble." "What kind of trouble?" she asked, her voice low. He finally looked at her then, his eyes like polished stone. "The kind that rides in on horses with feathers in their hair. And the kind that lives under this roof but forgets who she belongs to." The words dropped like a hammer. There was no mistaking the threat. Cole wasn't here to work cattle. He was a warning, a warden, a shadow meant to keep her in line. That night, Eliza lay awake in her oversized bed, fists clenched beneath the covers, her heart pounding against the silence. She was no longer just trapped. She was being kept, watched, owned. And the man who claimed her was a monster dressed in polished boots and frontier money. She thought of Cain, of his steadiness, his fire, his quiet kind of strength that didn't need to hurt to be felt. She thought of the life she could have had with him. Not an easy one, but a life built on choice, not fear, on dignity, not possession. And somewhere in that cold, silent room, something stirred. A flame, small, defiant, but burning. She would not let this be the end of her story. She wouldn't be a trophy in Luther Crow's house or a pawn in his empire. She'd find a way out. She'd find her way back to the man who pulled her from death, the one who saw her as more than a possession. The choice had been made. The fire had been lit. Now she just needed the moment to run. Cole Danner's presence on Crow Hill was like a sickness in the walls, slow, festering, impossible to ignore. He wasn't just a ranch hand. He was a shadow Luther Crow had planted to remind Eliza Hart exactly who held the leash. She'd spot him near the stables, always lounging like a snake half asleep but ready to strike. His scarred face wore a constant sneer, and though he never said another word to her, his eyes followed her every movement, predatory, smug, like he was daring her to forget what he'd done, what he was capable of doing again. He didn't need words. His presence alone was a threat, a loaded pistol in the corner of every room she entered. But fear, Eliza was beginning to learn, didn't just cripple, it carved. It could hollow you out, or it could hone you sharp. In the gilded confines of her prison, beneath the wide, indifferent Wyoming sky, she made her choice. She would not shrink. She would not survive. She would escape. The thought was absurd at first, dangerous, terrifying. Where would she go? The wilderness had nearly killed her once, and the ranch was a stronghold, full of men who'd follow Luther Crow's orders without question, all bought, all blind. She had nothing, no weapons, no allies, or maybe just one. Her eyes found Mara, the timid Irish maid who floated like a ghost through the corridors, whispering apologies to the air. Every movement the girl made was shaped by fear, fear of footsteps, fear of Luther, fear of speaking too loud or staying too long. But underneath that terror, Eliza saw something else. Kindness, quiet, untouched. She saw it in the way Mara's fingers lingered a second longer while braiding her hair, in the way her gaze softened when she thought Eliza wasn't looking. She never said it aloud, but her pity was a living thing, delicate and real. So Eliza began slowly, not with pleas or plans, but with patience. She asked Mara about County Cork, about the green hills and salty wind, about the family she left behind. Mara spoke in a hushed, breathless way, like her memories were fragile glass. But Eliza listened, and that mattered. 2 women, 2 prisoners in different cages, quietly reaching for a common thread. One evening, while Mara turned down the velvet coverlet, Eliza drew a slow breath. "I used to live in Boston," she said, her voice low. A life built for me, not by me. Every dress picked out, every word scripted. I was bred to be chosen, shaped to be someone's asset. She looked up at the girl. He sees me like a mare, she whispered, like something he bought to breed into his legacy. Mara froze. Her hand stilled on the blanket, and she shot a panicked glance toward the door. Miss, you can't say such things, she whispered. Her voice shook, heavy with accent and fear. The master, he hears things, even when he's not there. Eliza turned toward her, voice soft but unrelenting. And you, Mara? Are you free here? Are you happy? The girl's lip trembled. Her eyes welled, and one tear, just one, slipped down her cheek and disappeared into the velvet folds of the bedding. It was enough. Eliza saw it. The door wasn't open, but the lock had started to turn. Freedom's a luxury for the rich, miss, Mara whispered, her voice as soft as falling ash. For the likes of me, there's only service. It was the crack Eliza Hart had been waiting for. Over the next few nights, in hushed tones and careful glances toward the door, she let the truth spill. Not all at once, but piece by fragile piece. She spoke of the storm, of the shattered stagecoach lost to the blizzard, and of the shadow in the snow who had carried her to safety. She told Mara of the Apache camp, the smoke curling from the lodges, the tenderness of Shea's hands, and the quiet fire in Cain's eyes. She painted a world that was raw and uncertain, but honest. A world where she wasn't a prize or a burden. She was simply herself. And Mara, raised on whispered stories of saints and tragic romances, didn't see scandal. She saw a story, a real one worth rooting for. Her fear of Luther Crow didn't disappear, but it gave ground to something stronger, a fierce, silent loyalty. The tyrant of Crow Hill became the villain in their tale, and Mara, the shy maid, took her place beside Eliza not as a servant, but as a sister in arms. We have to get you out of here, Mara said one night, the firelight catching in her eyes. The determination in her voice startled them both. We have to. From that moment, the whispers turned to plans. Mara, invisible as dust in the halls, began to map the rhythms of the ranch, the habits of the dust riders, the holes in the watch rotations, the routines of the bunkhouse. Then came the break. She overheard Luther planning a trip to Cheyenne. 4 days gone, chasing a railroad deal. It would be their only window. But escape meant more than slipping past locked doors. It meant reaching someone who could brave the wild and carry word to Cain. The Apache camp was days away, hidden past mountains and danger. They needed a rider, someone young, sharp, trustworthy. Mara already had someone in mind. There was a young ranch hand, quiet, sandy-haired, soft-spoken, named Thomas. He kept to himself, didn't drink, and rode like the saddle was part of him. Mara had noticed the way he looked at her in the mess hall. Curious, kind, careful not to stare too long. She'd also seen something else. The fury in Thomas's eyes when Cole Danner had whipped a favorite horse nearly to death for slipping in the mud. The boy hadn't said a word, but Mara saw the grudge carved deep in his silence. She approached him slowly, careful not to spook him. She didn't mention Cain or the Apache. That truth was too fragile to risk. Instead, she spun a story, a simple one he'd understand. She told him that Miss Eliza was being held here under lock and threat, that Luther planned to marry her, and she had no say in it, that she had kin north of the ranch, kin who could protect her. It was a lie, but a necessary one. Thomas hesitated. He wasn't blind to the danger. "If Mr. Crow finds out," he muttered, his voice trailing off like a man staring at the edge of a cliff. "And if he forces her to marry him?" Mara asked softly, her eyes locking with his. To live every day beside a man like that, when she could still be free? Can a good man stand by and watch that happen? She placed her hand gently on his arm. "I thought you were a good man, Thomas." That was all it took. His jaw clenched. He nodded once. They had their rider. That night, by the faint glow of the hearth, Eliza took a scrap of linen torn from the hem of her shift and a charred stick of charcoal. Her fingers trembled as she scrawled 7 desperate words. "Cain, if you still love me, come. He's gone to Cheyenne. 4 days. They're keeping me here. Please help." She didn't sign it with her name. Instead, Eliza Hart drew a simple bluebird in charcoal, a mark only Cain would recognize, a symbol whispered from the past, a tribute to Shia's name and all it had meant. The night Luther Crow's carriage rumbled down the long ranch road. Tension crackled through the air like a storm waiting to break. Eliza wore her mask well, dutiful still, letting him press a cold kiss against her cheek like parchment brushing skin. She fought the bile rising in her throat and smiled. From the second-story window, she and Mara watched the carriage disappear into the darkness. A silent breath passed between them. Phase 1 was done. Now came the real test. Beneath a moonless sky, Thomas slipped out of the bunkhouse like a shadow. He moved quick and quiet, saddling his best horse with calloused hands. No words, no hesitation, only the weight of what he'd agreed to carry. They watched from the darkness as he vanished into the endless black sea of prairie. Then came the waiting. 3 days stretched like wire drawn tight, ready to snap. Every distant voice outside, every gust of hooves, every door creak set Eliza's nerves on fire. Time fractured, each hour dragging on as if stitched with barbed thread. She forced herself to eat, to sew, to play the part of the melancholy bride-to-be no one ever questioned. But behind her calm, her stomach twisted with dread. Cole Danner slithered through the halls like a snake left behind to guard the cage, meaner and looser without Crow's leash. One evening, he cornered her in the hallway. His breath stank of whiskey and rot. "Enjoying the quiet, missy?" he slurred, eyes gleaming with something worse than mischief. "Don't get used to it. The master will be home soon, and he likes his things right where he left them." Eliza said nothing. She just stared, ice in her blood, and walked past him without a word. It took everything she had, not to run. Each night, she and Mara exchanged glances packed with fear and urgency, their shared secret pressing down like a stone tied to their ribs. If Thomas had been caught, they'd be next. On the 3rd day, as the sky bled orange and red above the plains, a rider appeared on the eastern rise. Eliza's breath snagged in her throat. Too soon for Luther, too early for a patrol. Could it be? The rider came closer, swift and sure, astride a painted pony that moved like wind over water. Not a cowboy, not a dust rider. The man rode like he belonged to the land itself. Tall, still, black hair loose and whipping in the wind, a figure carved from the earth and sky. Cain. He didn't charge in like a hero from a dime novel. He rode slow, with purpose, and stopped just outside rifle range from the main house. No weapons drawn, no shouts, only presence. He looked up, straight to the second-story window, straight to her. Their eyes met across that long distance. And in that moment, the world narrowed to one truth. He had come. Joy erupted inside Eliza, hot and full, like the sun cracking through thunderclouds. Every fear, every doubt fell away. He was here. He hadn't forgotten. He still believed. But joy was short-lived. A ranch hand had seen the rider and shouted. Within moments, the bunkhouse door slammed open, and Cole Danner came stumbling out, drunk, red-faced, gun in hand. "Well, I'll be damned," he spat, staggering into the yard. "The buck come back for his dough." His laugh was thick and broken. "You got stones, Engine. I'll give you that." Kane didn't speak. He didn't blink. His eyes never left Eliza's window. But his hand drifted slowly to the knife at his belt. Cole raised the pistol, grip clumsy. "She ain't yours," he growled. "She belongs to Mr. Crow. And what's his, I protect." His finger twitched. The storm had arrived. From the darkness near the barn, a voice rang out sharp as a whip. "Put the gun down, Cole." It was Thomas. He'd returned, pale but steady, a rifle locked in his hands. He doubled back after delivering the message. Instinct, fate, something deeper. He had circled around unseen and taken up position just moments before Kane arrived. Cole spun, startled. Drunken surprise twisted into fury. "You," he hissed. "You little snake. You're in on this." Tomas didn't flinch. His hands trembled slightly, but his voice held. "It's over, Cole. Let them go." Cole snarled. "I'll see you in hell first." And with that, he didn't turn the gun on Kane. He turned it on the unarmed boy. The shot rang out before he could pull the trigger. One echo. One crack splitting through the dusk. Cole jerked backward, a stunned look on his face. He looked down, eyes wide, watching the dark red bloom on his chest. Then he crumpled like broken timber, face first into the dirt. Silence fell. Then Eliza moved. She didn't pause, didn't wait for someone to say it was safe. She flew down the staircase, her dress snagging on the porch rail, her shoes slipping in the dust. She ran, breathless, across the yard, past Cole's body, past the stunned ranch hands, and straight to Kane. He leaned from the saddle and swept her up with one powerful arm, pulling her behind him. Her arms locked tight around his waist, her cheek pressed to his back. He was real, warm, alive, and he had come. From the window, Mara watched, her face streaked with tears, some of sorrow, some of joy. In the yard, Thomas stepped out of the barn, the rifle still smoking in his grip. His eyes held no pride, only the weight of what he'd done, and the quiet peace of knowing he'd done it for the right reasons. Kane gave Thomas one solemn nod. No words, just the acknowledgement of a man who knew what it cost to save someone. Then he kicked his heels into the horse's side. They didn't ride into a painted sunset, but into the cold, deepening twilight. Not into safety, but into freedom, raw and uncertain. Behind them, Crow Hill burned in silence. A tyrant gone, a house split, and two unlikely heroes left behind in the wreckage. But ahead, a future not yet written. Eliza pressed her face into Kane's back and inhaled. The air sharp, clean, and full of something she thought she'd lost forever. Hope. And no, their story didn't end there. Not with that ride, not with a single shot. It was just beginning. Their love became a bridge. Between worlds, between past and future. They built a life from hardship, from hunted miles and quiet nights beneath the stars. They fought to protect the people who had sheltered them, to honor the old ways and carve a space for new ones. Prejudice came. Hard winters came. But so did children, and so did love. Fierce, quiet, unshakable. The bond they forged in the heart of a Wyoming storm never broke. Finally, let me send my deep thanks to you. We appreciate you more than you think. If this tale stirred something deep inside, we invite you to remain part of this frontier of memories. More true stories of honor, compassion, and destiny are waiting for you here. Subscribe, share, comment, and thank you for riding with us today. Aviso legal. Disclaimer. Our content is designed for artistic and entertainment purposes and may reinterpret historical themes using fictional touches. We apply AI tools thoughtfully, only to support production, while keeping human supervision over editing, emotional tone, and narrative coherence. We always comply with regulatory guidelines for AI-based media and avoid deepfake practices or identity manipulation. All supporting components remain legally sourced. Please ask for authorization before sharing or adapting any segment. Your respect makes it possible for us to continue telling meaningful stories.